So, hey, I tell you what we'll do. We'll just start up. So, I'll introduce Ms. and he'll lead the discussion. But so it's pointing right over here. So mostly that's just for sound, but it is no. You won't be able to see that when you listen to just this.
Okay.
But anyway, welcome to Green Street. We're going to start the talk up. Might as well, while you guys are talking, I figured that was a good indication that you were here for the artist talk. But I want to introduce the artists first real quick, just so you'll know. That's Jeff Warmouth. This is Leah Johnstone-Mosher. This is Scott Listfield. And Matthew Nash is the curator who brought them all here and helped kind of figure out how the work fit in space. So anyway, since I think Leah has already answered some questions about this piece. We can go ahead and start. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of like start kind of with you and then maybe watch Jeff's and talk to Scott and then anybody can interrupt and ask questions.
Should we do a monologue or since we're already into dialogue?
Well, if you've got a little something you want to say, go ahead and practice. But mostly I think it's great when people can stop you and ask their questions instead of trying to remember them until the end.
Oh yeah,
that makes you have even more stuff.
Any questions at all? A lot of, like, in terms of artist talks, I think they're kind of a difficult thing to approach because I don't think, at least I don't work linearly. The ideas are not, you know, this happened and then that happened and that happened. And when you're talking, you know, language is linear, so kind of shoving all of your ideas into this linear thing doesn't always work, but I'm going to try. I also don't want to, like, poison anybody's idea or their perceptions because I feel like one of the great things about art is that it doesn't stop when you make it. It's so much of it is like viewer interaction, and you know, I try to do that with the space, trying to bring people into the space, you know, trying to make them feel invited into the space. So if your ideas about the work are different from my ideas of the work, I would say that yours are equally as valid. And with that, I'll express my ideas. It started with a sense of alienation from nature in general, which I think is not totally apparent because they're playful and friendly. But I feel like our lives, we don't deal with nature or even with like the physical world all that often. We deal with like virtual reality, like we don't write, you know, in conversation we like type to people. You know, there's no tone of voice, there's no eye contact. Things become very like inhuman, and just in my own experience, like I know what a gigabyte is more than I know what an acre is, and like I can, you know, and so like where does that lead me? Because I am like a physical being, I am obviously from nature, but I don't deal with nature on any sort of consistent level. So that's really where these came out of. You know, someone told me that they felt that they were bad copies of nature, and I actually really like that because it is kind of where I'm coming from. It's like we have these artificial things that we produce, you know, like instant messenger or like, you know, a false identity on MySpace. I mean, people attach their identities to MySpace, like, in such a ridiculous level. And these are kind of like, what? What?
They're so bad, they're cute.
I know. Yeah, exactly. They're kitschy. I mean, and it's hard to get away from kids with AstroTurf, but
Did you hear about the artist who committed MySpace suicide?
yes!
No.
And there was a MySpace bulletin about it.
Actually, MySpace funded the performance, I think.
Really?
Anyways, go ahead.
So, but, so they're just kind of false copies, and they reference, or like, you know, crappy copies, and they reference, of course, like the digital world, and they're constructed from circuit boards, electrical wire, and capacitors. The bases are foam. I think the copper in the wire is the only natural element. The rest is like insulation foam and all sorts of toxic chemicals. And so they're just kind of horrifying representations of what could be, you know? And also with the, it's distracting. With the light flowers, I think it's sort of, you know, plants produce their own energy. They're like the only thing that produce their own energy. And here we're like hooking them up to this artificial energy that we produce. So that's pretty much where they come from. That's the concept surrounding them. And again, I hope that people feel comfortable walking among them and touching them and, you know, just interacting with them in general. So I would invite questions.
I was curious just about transforming them from another space to this space. I think this is like the first time you've spread them out this much, or
well, actually,
just
the
how you
first
dealt with
time
that.
they were in really small vases, so I had all of the same flowers, but they were on thinner wire, and they were interspersed, so they were more like little things popping out of the ground, as opposed to more, well, not quite monumental, but larger, sort of more assertive pieces. And I think that this is a lot more effective. I mean, the drama of building them was like pretty intense, but I think that they're maybe less welcoming now, because the other ones were so small that they really just felt like they weren't as much like art, like I'm art, I'm in a space, I'm, you know, not totally approachable. But I think these also have more of what I'm saying. The AstroTurf is a new introduction. I think they interact with the space better. Yeah, so I think it was actually a really positive experience. Also getting to work with a curator, which I've never done before, was amazing. Because it's not just you sitting there, you know, what do I do, what do I do? You actually have like a sounding board to interact with, which is massive. I mean, yeah.
Well, it's fun to hear an artist talk about what they're thinking about too, because the phrases that come out when you're trying to describe what you're doing, and the one that I remember from the install that I just loved was, well, how do you want the light up ones? Well, before they were kind of pumpkin patchy. And that was, oh, I know what you're saying. Okay, pumpkin patchy. That makes perfect sense. You know, so you kind of get into someone's way of thinking, you know, Leah's way of thinking of how she wants these to look, but it's not. I want them to be, you know, perfectly spaced, or I want them to be lights. I want them to be pumpkin patchy. You have to get into that mentality.
When you were making the bases for them, I mean, I think one of the things that was really interesting about it was that the base added to the kind of artificiality, just the shape of it. I mean, instead of it being a rounded mound, or and you did the same thing when you were making these kind of walkways. They weren't like, you made a conscious, I don't want a curving little path, and you considered a picket fence. So you definitely play in the garden game. But I thought that this was such a, that was for me, I hadn't seen them when they just came out before. I'd only seen images of them. But the fact that the terrain was foreign and the materials were foreign, I thought that was a really nice combination.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the really important things about AstroTurf also, just in terms of the concept, is that it's made to be a replacement for grass. It's like, you can be lazy and have this on your, I mean, no offense to anyone who's AstroTurf, but, but you know, it's a replacement for something that's actually live that people interact with. You have a garden and you have to attend to it, whereas AstroTurf is just obviously also a really bad copy, and yeah, and in terms of the geometry, they have a real feeling of mass production, I think, and I did approach the entire process as mass production. Like, I would cut 20, flowers, which is like, 120 pieces, and then glue them all at one time and put them all together. So there's that mass production, and straight lines obviously are a lot like, that's mass production. I mean, all rooms are square because it's easy, and so geometry is a definite important thing, and all the bases are identical as well.
Did any of that construction make you kind of appreciate the structure of a flower? Because I always find, like, when you imitate something, you also go, wow, that's a lot. I've never looked at it this closely. That's a lot more complicated.
Very early on, I realized that there were major limitations in what you could construct. Because I had built some models out of balsa, which is much easier to work with than like circuit board, and I mean, one flower would take me like 2 hours, which was just not an option when you're building this amount of flowers. So yes, definitely. And I think that's an interesting idea too. These don't offer that. They don't offer like the individuality of like actual nature. I mean, you can have one species of flower, but each one is just a little bit different, whereas these are exactly the same. So they yield that artificiality just to really interact with them.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's interesting because as you started talking about the whole kind of like digital virtual aspect, and the fact that that they're bad copies, or in a way, not even so much bad copies, but copies that have like a very limited language that can be used to describe the thing that it's describing. And it sort of started reminding me of like Legos or other types of building blocks like that, you know what I mean, where you're limited to the sort of like the pixelation of the that's maybe the guy's version is a Lego, and you want to genderize this, and
No, I had Legos. I had Legos.
But there you go.
Mr. Potato Head in your case.
Exactly. But no, I mean, I love that aspect that, you know, as you say, like as you're cranking out 20 or 30 of these things that are the exact same flower. And the interesting thing, of course, is that since you're hand cutting them, they do actually have some variation.
Yeah, a tiny
right?
bit. Yeah.
Right. But the variation is a very different kind of variation, right? Because I suppose if you really were to mass produce them, they would be perfectly bad copies. You know what I mean? But now they actually have more personality and variation than they would if they were perfect bad copies.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, you know, the limited amount of, you know, limited options that you have, you know, with Legos or something, because circuit boards, I think they only, you know, draw little lines at right angles and 45-degree angles.
So you're breaking that already because you're actually, you're going diagonal, so. But there's a, you know, they're all uniform thickness, right? They're all uniform color, so you have all that working for you.
It's kind of interesting to have them. The flowers are green. You know, usually it's like the separation between the leaves of a plant and the flowers that it's similar structure, but it turns in this usually another color. I was curious about your capacitors, like you like picking these things out for. I love going to Home Depot and picking things out. No, don't tell me what this is for. I'm using it for some completely different reason. You're just gonna slow things down if you ask me what this is for. You know, what is this for? Yeah.
Well, with the capacitors, I mean, I started by opening up computers, and that was an insane amount of time. I mean, it takes a really long time to open up a computer.
Is that the thing that's kind of a stamen there?
Exactly, yeah, they're little capacitors. And then, you know, I went to Radio Shack.
You're gonna get pollen all over you.
I only want the blue ones.
Yeah, well, I wanted to stay in a pretty cool range, because, I mean, even emotionally, they're very cold objects, I mean, which is, you know, again, in keeping. And there were some orange capacitors that I decided against. I mean, that's just also, I'm a limited palette person. General.
The spiders really
That's great,
like
though,
them.
No, I like those.
Oh, but I can imagine you blowing the minds of the guy at Radio Shack, like, what kind of capacitors do you need, man? The orange ones.
I know. Well, it's actually just fun also going to Home Depot and being like, do you have this particular wire? No, I don't need to know the voltage. I just, you know.
Right.
So it is.
What gauge? Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there was talk of this. I don't think you actually did this, but I think people looking at the work you probably know there was some talk of spraying these with new car smell. So if anybody wanted to stamp them.
New car smell?
You should. Yeah, I mean, just to give you something else, like what?
Because I mean, during the opening, people were definitely, you know, sniffing the flowers. And if they got a new car smell, I just thought,
Yeah.
Or just ozone.
Yeah.
or just that pine tree, that fake pine tree smell.
Totally.
Solder.
That's what they would expect, that rosin smell from
Yeah, exactly. Flux. What's next?
I have so many projects. I'm building a circuit board garden where it's like a plexiglass piece that has partitions, you know, about that high, lit from the bottom, so you just have the top surfaces lit, and I'm gonna grow moss in it.
Real moss?
So,
Real
yeah.
moss.
Apparently it's not that difficult to grow, I hope. But
That fails, try sea monkeys.
yeah.
It's really easy to grow mold.
I'm trying to stay away from that. But, yeah, and then there's a few other projects. I don't want to jinx myself, you know. But I'll let you know when they happen.
Awesome. Well, maybe easier to switch over to Scott talking about his, because I think some of the things you're talking about with the color choices and the natural environment versus the artificial environment would fit in pretty nicely with what he's been working on. Do you want to do your soliloquy, monologue? What was that? No, it's.
That would be the assumption I have a soliloquy.
Yeah.
Is it all right if I ask a
Oh yeah.
Sure, of course. I had asked a question before. If you known that you were going to exhibit in a space that had a brick floor like this, because when I first approached the pieces, all the pieces as a whole, I wasn't sure if I should step in or not, for me. And I thought that the contrast with the lines before, maybe that's just like totally out, but I thought it kind of reminded me actually of Post Office Square, so it made me think that like the grass, the artificial grass that's here, was sort of like mocking like the outdoor spaces. So you're thinking to yourself, this isn't grass, I should go to somewhere where there's real grass. Just like in Post Office Square where it's like, here you go, here's some grass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
A spoonful.
yeah, you know,
Step in it.
like,
But then you still don't know if you're supposed to walk on it.
right.
It's kind of like,
You're still
it
like,
looks good, there's a fence.
That's interesting. I mean, it would be good if you went and found some real grass. I think that's like a positive reaction, sort of. Do you mean you don't feel comfortable walking in here, or you don't feel comfortable walking on the
Well,
AstroTurf?
at first I didn't, but then I did. But then again, there was like this.
Barrier
But I
that
thought
you
it.
felt
I
between?
thought it was. That's what I thought, and I thought it was good.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of talk during the install about sort of creating these garden paths. And there was even talk of little white fences that might help people feel a little more comfortable
Yeah.
about where they can
Just
walk
like-
and where they couldn't. But ultimately, what I think what it sort of came down to is the fact that, short of actually stomping on the bases, it's all fair game. You're supposed to go sniff the flowers, and but at the same time, the flowers are awkward. So you're supposed to go awkwardly sniff the flowers. That's I guess that's almost the game that's being played here, is the comfort of sort of pseudo nature, and then the awkwardness of pseudo nature. These weird, the way these angles don't actually line up with each other. Like visually creates this weird, awkward. It's not a garden path. No one would make a path that does that.
And that goes into the walls as well. But, I mean, I think we tried to use
Is
the.
this polygon congruent with that polygon?
Continental drift.
But I think we tried to like exploit the floor actually, kind of feel like a path that you might see. But it's interesting that you didn't feel comfortable. Definitely food for thought.
Or that you did, it made you think about real grass in a good comparison,
Well, I think
preferable.
Anytime you're in an art gallery, though, I mean, and this is such a strange art gallery space too, right? It's a gallery that's in the T. Are we in the T? Are we congruent with the T, or are we separated out? But because I think I shared that too. Like I'm supposed to walk on it. It's just AstroTurf. But
Well,
it's like so it is kind of strangely uninviting, right? It doesn't make you want to cross the line.
Which is kind of okay, because I want you to feel a little uncomfortable, because I feel like when most people approach them, there's like, oh, they're cute and they're whimsical in there, which is nice. But there's also, it's a very uncomfortable thing, and it kind of should be. It's sort of grotesque in my opinion, like the entire thing. So I'm kind of glad that it sort of yields that uncomfortability, because we should kind of be uncomfortable with the fact that we don't talk, we don't see the people that we're talking to ever, 80% of the time talk to someone, that's an uncomfortable fact. And I feel like because these are, you don't realize it when it sort of intrudes on your life so constantly, those kind of, typing and lack of contact with actual human beings. But these are so bizarre that maybe they'll give you that, I don't know if it would make you think about these things per se, but.
They're almost like floating islands.
Yeah.
You gotta get that feeling that it's sort of like, and I think that might be one of the reasons you feel wanting to step on it. I felt pulled in, but it's like it's floating there, and it's sort of foreign.
Interesting.
It also points out that you've been very successful at changing it from rug to grass, because we wouldn't be talking about whether we should step on AstroTurf if it was on a football field or on a deck, or going down the stairs to your playroom basement or whatever,
Yeah.
or on the decking of a boat, or so
we just rolled out that
it suddenly
Or
gets
if you'd rolled out the entire space.
right. So you suddenly you brought it back kind of into that relationship of whether it's alive or not,
Yeah.
or whether, in addition to it kind of looking broken and having all of those other things that the shapes bring in there.
Please don't walk on the fake grass.
You
Yeah.
find things to walk around, right?
Yeah. Well, so thanks for that. That's one of those observations you can't get as the artist who made it, because you got all the other things to think about.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, your comfort level is different with your own work, certainly.
Of course people walk in there. Won't people walk in there? Yeah, they'll,
I know.
we're trying to decide that,
Well,
but you
I think
actually...
the dogs, there were dogs at the opening, and that was good because the dogs were all over it. So you
So, Mr. Scott.
Yeah, my turn?
Yeah, give us some thoughts.
Leah, we may come back to you at any moment,
Yeah.
so...
Yeah, I'm
that
gonna
was
redirect
good.
us back in your direction. All right, well, I paint astronauts. Sort of the short.
That's the opening sentence.
That's
we're
my
looking
opening
for.
sentence, and I can leave it at that and sort of say thank you. Or we can go into a little more detail. We got the camera rolling, so maybe I should say something else. Trying to work a lead-in from our last speaker. I guess the sort of detachedness from contemporary society. Am I pushing that a little too hard? All right, I paint astronauts, and I can tell you the genesis because this is my spiel. People ask me, why do you paint astronauts? And I go, do you really want to know? And then they usually say no, and that's sort of it. If they say yes, I go, all right. So in each one of my paintings, there's a astronaut, and he's sort of wandering around in what might be contemporary present, might be some sort of fantastic future. It's all uncertain. But the basic gist of it goes, sometime around the year 1999, 2000, I was working through some ideas in my head. I wanted to make paintings that had sort of a narrative, but had a protagonist character that walked through them. At the time, I was looking a lot at these Picasso paintings, these early Picasso paintings, where you had what's the word I'm looking for? The guy in the tights who's the entertainer. Harlequin, thank you. I should have known that. He had a Harlequin walk around. There was a Harlequin drinking at a bar, and there was a Harlequin like doing stuff. And I really like the idea of casting a character like out in your paintings to sort of go out into the world, almost like a short story revolving around a character. And so I was thinking, well, I could just steal Picasso's idea, but I've never seen a Harlequin in person, so that'd be a little bit lame, really. So I was thinking, who would my character be? So I happened to be watching the Kubrick film 2001. And like I said, it was like 1999 or 2000. And I'm watching the film, and I started thinking about it as if it were a documentary about today, which is kind of absurd because it's not at all a documentary about today. And in fact, it wasn't really even close. There was almost nothing close. It was just as futuristic now as it was, 30, 40 years, whatever.
The furniture was just better.
The furniture was better. Yeah.
Even though
So I thought, what if an astronaut, sort of the fictional astronaut of the future 2001, were here to walk around in the contemporary 2001. Because I was thinking a lot about how, the America that I saw, you go to the supermarket and it's sort of overwhelming. It's overwhelming in ways that, probably would have been overwhelming to people 30, 40 years ago. So in a way it is very futuristic. But on the other hand, for us it's like, do I want store brand Oreos? Do I want regular Oreos? Do I want vanilla Oreos? Do I want, the special holiday Oreos that come with an orange thing in the center because it's close to Halloween? It's like a mundane, it's like an overwhelming mundaneness, I guess. Should probably copyright that word. So I wanted to cast my astronaut out to sort of explore this overwhelming mundaneness of sort of the American landscape. And so I guess if you ask, is it sort of the future world? Is it the present world? Is it real? Is it fictional? What's going on in here? And I'd say it's somewhere on a plane in between all those things. But really, the way I think about it is he's sort of out there, the astronaut's out there in the world, that it is the world, is what you think the world would be if you didn't actually go out in the world, but just watch TV. So it's kind of the America of television is really what it is. It's not real per se, but things that happen all the time on TV that never happen in real life happen on here. You're walking down the street and a car explodes and a motorcycle flies through the air and it's like, yeah, that doesn't happen to me in real life. But if I flip through the TVs, it's happening on every other channel, that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of world I wanted to cast the astronaut out into. And also I've got sort of smarmy things to say about contemporary art and art design, music, etc. So I wanted I wanted all these things to sort of, to become the world that I was sort of creating. I came out of school as a representational painter, and it was like, do you want to paint still life? Do you want to go paint the landscape? Do you want to paint things, perceptually, as they are? Do you want to make some crap up? And I was like, I'm a representational painter, but that doesn't mean I have to paint exactly what I'm seeing in the world. I can paint, if I can paint it, which at the time I didn't know if I could. I'd never painted an explosion or never even painted like a cow before. So I don't spend a lot of time out in nature looking at cows. Really, all I know is I've seen a lot of cows on TV. I know what TV cows look like. So I said, if I can paint it, I can put it inside a world, and it can become an object that exists in my world for the astronaut to do whatever he wants to. I can put celebrities in there if I want to. I don't bump into celebrities in the real life, but on TV they're everywhere. Why wouldn't a celebrity be hanging out with my astronaut? That's what happens on television. So. I sort of started slowly, and I progressed through these paintings, trying to build a world full of objects for the astronaut to interact with. So each painting I think of as the astronaut encountering some objects in some space. I guess that's my spiel.
Well, you seem to be really particular. I mean, you're a connoisseur of kind of iconic images from different times too, and
right.
Like when you decide to be schmarmy about contemporary art, it's not just. It seems like you've definitely studied up, and you're after Starbucks a little bit, and Nike and Coca-Cola and Damien Hirst, and
I don't think of myself as a pop artist really per se, but I definitely use pop culture. I mean, I'm not self-conscious about the pop culture references I use, but it's more just sort of like that's my life. I watch TV. I don't go to the opera. I watch TV. So these are elements of my life. But so I wanted to incorporate some of them into my works, but I didn't want to use anything that would be sort of dated within a couple of years, So I deliberately went after things that are really almost iconic, that are recognizable. Starbucks logo, okay, Starbucks, McDonald's logo, but are also sort of a little more timeless, that people will know what the heck they are in 10 years, and also a little bit more representative of McDonald's is it's McDonald's logo, but it's also people are like. McDonald's, big business, it's got sort of grander connotations of what it's talking about.
They're also, I mean, at least two of the paintings that are here that I have to say we had to fight pretty hard to get two of these paintings here, and then one that
we arm wrestled.
The sort of feature, which seems like we're both scrawny.
I know.
And then one that actually was the sort of feature of his last show that we couldn't get here, but in this one. Here, and then the one on the other side with Chewbacca, and then the one that was the feature of your last show, which is, if you haven't seen it, it's the astronaut, and he's hailing down a city bus, and the destination of the bus is the moon. Yeah. But actually, my favorite of that last show, and we fought hard to get this one, because it's an astronaut in the mountains going to Space Mountain, and it just, the whole thing had such a circular logic that you look at that painting and you go, oh, I get it. It makes perfect sense that an astronaut would be climbing the mountains to go to space. You don't have to question why or how or when or where. All of these things come together in just this really random and bizarre circular logic of pop culture and the character that you've created. In the same way that the astronaut waiting for an elevator could probably, Chewbacca would be there looking at the Donald Judd. Of course. I mean, Cloud City and The Empire Strikes Back probably had solid sculptures somewhere.
Well, that was the genesis of that. They did. That was the genesis of that painting. My initial thought was probably, crap, I don't know anyone who made a painting of Chewbacca. That's cool. That was probably my first thought. But once I got beyond that, I felt like I couldn't just sort of paint it. Like, oh, hey, Chewbacca. So I was thinking, I'd like to think a lot about these science fiction films, from which I steal so much of my source imagery. I think a lot about like what happens usually in these science fiction films. They're all doing like future things. They're fighting robots. They're flying cars and spaceships. Nobody paused to like go to the supermarket and buy bananas or something. And I spend a lot of time thinking about the mundane activities that must happen in these future, because we're never going to make our future the real future unless we figure out how do you buy bananas in a floating cloud city. You know what I mean?
Can you talk about the robot store?
At the robot store, sure, yeah. That's
it's another painting that we weren't able to get for this show, but
well, talk about it, it's not here. But yeah, at the robot store is sort of typical of that genre. And people have robots, and aside from, I guess there was a scene in Star Wars where they actually purchased secondhand robots. But for the most part, they don't talk a lot about where these robots come from. And again, I guess it's sort of finding the mundane details, taking sort of mundane details of every life, like going to Costco and buying 400 rolls of toilet paper, and sort of supplanting it to this like exciting future dynamic thing. It's like you gotta go to the robot store and buy a robot. And you get there, and the salesman's like pushing you towards the one that's on sale. And you're kind of kicking the tires, and you're like, I don't know, man. This thing is like 5 years old. So I think that was sort of the source of the robot story. But just one last note about the Chewbacca painting. Again, I like to sort of poke fun at kind of everything around me, and obviously I'm an artist, so I poke fun at the art world too. So I was kind of thinking, like, if you're in Cloud City and you're sort of running away from Darth Vader, there's got to be like things happening in Cloud City. Like, wouldn't there be some art shows in Cloud City? Are there artists who live in Cloud City? And if so, and I'm looking at Cloud City, and I'm like, Donald Judd would be really big in Cloud City. I bet that goes pretty well. So I decided to make sort of a minimalist sculpture retrospective happening in the gallery in Cloud City. And it just sort of coincided with Chewbacca running away from Darth Vader. He just stumbled upon it, I suppose.
I was very curious about the Sarah being in Cloud City, thinking with the anti-gravity and the super-gravity guy. Yeah, would they work?
He install his job would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Float it in place. Tape it to the wall or something. I don't know.
The only question I've always had, the astronaut's dressed for like full-on spacewalk astronaut action. Mm-hmm. And he's always in places with gravity doing incredibly mundane things.
Yeah. Well,
and atmosphere.
In atmosphere.
In the future, you're doing one of a few things. You're in space, you're fighting aliens, or you're hanging out with robots. This is what you do in the future. And so clearly he came prepared, the astronaut came prepared to do what you do in the future.
He's taking the subway there.
He's on the bus that's tethered to wires that's going to the moon. But he's ready, he's prepared.
See, I see these as totally being like Planet of the Apes, like this astronaut's like wandering around, and he just like stops like, oh my god, I'm home.
They're like,
they blew it up.
Well, to float your boat, you can consider, Charlton Heston's floating somewhere behind the mast. Some overacting behind the mast.
well, the suit is actually kind of looks like the 60s Mercury astronaut suit. It's not like the newest suit, so it actually kind of...
Yeah, that's actually very deliberate because that's sort of the era of sci-fi that I'm going after, sort of the 60s. So I it's all Gemini Mercury era suits that I don't want anything too super modern looking because oddly enough, in the 60s, the future looked kind of like the 60s.
Well, I've always felt there's an undertone to these paintings of
box from Star Trek or something.
No, this is a Damien Hirst sculpture.
which is at the MFA.
That's from the past.
Yeah,
That's from the past.
I've actually always felt that these paintings have a sort of undertone of like the future is now.
Oh, absolutely.
Like this sort of guy who traveled forward in time, who is now hanging out with us, going.
Don't
right,
even
whoa.
go.
I think that's definitely one of the main. That's one of my main points. Absolutely, is that people still think we still go to the movie theaters and watch space travel and Wookiees and the fact of the matter is that like the present is super freaking weird with all kinds of crazy futuristic inventions that we totally don't even really stop to notice.
Yeah, that whole picture's flying through the sky.
Cell phones and the present is the future really. I mean that's sort of a fundamental
Well,
point.
what's great about one of the great things about the astronaut is that it becomes this kind of this stand-in for the outsider that gets to look at our culture and critique
Right.
it.
It does a really good job of pointing out like that is weird.
What's the weird thing about this painting? Is it the astronaut or is it the Damien Hirst?
Well, I think the direction I've been going in lately is that usually the weird thing is not the astronauts. Usually after you see the first one, you're like, okay, there's the astronaut. What the hell is going on over there, Yeah. And it's sort of,
Where's Waldo? Like,
There's the astronaut. What else is going on?
The first few paintings I did, it came out of, I was doing self-portraits at the time, so the first few paintings I did, the astronaut was kind of just huge. And it's mostly sort of about the astronaut being wherever he is, the astronaut. And as it progressed, the astronaut has sort of progressively taken up a smaller and smaller place as sort of the world becomes the subject matter, and the astronaut is sort of just the character.
Well, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Actually. Because I kind of felt like the whole astronaut thing was sort of a critique of how self-contained people are nowadays. And I'm not trying to get all, anything about it, but that's what I thought it was about, especially in those couple on the other side when he's in these sort of larger-than-life arenas. Times Square being one of them, and the other with that whole, I wasn't sure what to think of.
So you think he's got an iPod going and
he's
can't hear what?
He's completely like, well, not self-involved, but like, self-contained.
Yeah.
Everything is, he doesn't need anything. He's got his own air, he's got his own everything. And it sort of turns it into a lonely / for me, voyeuristic sort of existence. Because he's, like every scene he's sort of like, just sort of not really doing anything except that one there. But he's just sort of observing. But I thought it was really great how you had him you drew in the Starbucks, like the everyday thing, and you have the astronaut with Starbucks on his lap. And it's like, how's he gonna deal with that?
How's he gonna drink that?
Yeah.
Well, in the future, actually, all spacesuits will have a little Starbucks thing.
As soon as it pipes Starbucks.
Nice. But he also, the astronaut, I say he, but we don't, it's genderless. But the astronaut, I mean, I guess in one sense we could see it as you, it's like a self-portrait or a stand-in. But I think the astronaut also becomes us, the viewer. I mean, there's the whole voyeur thing, right? Depending on how you see it, because we are potentially, kind of looking at these environments, and we're not really interacting because we've got this distance from them.
He might as well be sitting there with his finger out going, look, look at this.
Yeah.
Look, there's a shark in subway. I mean, because it works that way. You kind of come in there, only thing you know that's going to be there after you've seen 3 is the astronaut.
Right.
And so you're kind of like, what did he find now? Look, Mom, it's a Damien Hirst painting.
But I identify.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like,
absolutely.
what am I looking? I mean, the astronaut who was me looking at. Now I'm riding on a horse, looking at a Bucky Fuller geodesic dome.
Does anybody else feel like a major nostalgia in these? Like I see this astronaut kind of going, I got to go back and see the subway. How quaint. How quaint that is. And remember when we could ride horses? Let's go ride one more time. I remember Captain Kirk would always go back to these planets that look just like the area outside of Hollywood. And he'd be so excited to see grass again, and so that I thought that was that's a classic example where there'd be one bad prop rock that they would fight against, but everything else would be that classic mixture of near future and super far away future. But it makes you kind of
strange geometric flowers on the floor.
Paper mache rocks that you could throw or easily.
Yeah, right. Well, I've long held the belief that science fiction is always about now. You use the future to talk about now. And it's interesting to see, what I've always liked about these paintings is that, you're using, everybody knows that science fiction is talking about now. Everybody knows that the War of the Worlds is about the Cold War, So, when you see the astronaut who's science fiction, who's talking about now, who's actually not talking about now, who's talking about then when they were talking about now, that's when it becomes fun. It's it's easy for sci-fi to be about, sort of the present moment through talking about the future. It's way more interesting to talk about the present moment through the sci-fi of the past in that sense. And also the art of, a lot of the art of the past, Damien Hirst and Jeffu are two that you picked who were very much about, isolating pop culture and really talking about their moment in pop culture. So having a future past now, looking at art that was about the future past, it gets that weird sort of mental cycle that makes you walk away and think about it for hours on end. Endless spiral while drinking Starbucks. Well, shall we go watch Jeff's video?
Yes.
Pick his brain. All right.
Excellent work.
Thank you very much.
I've learned so much. We should have done this sooner. Are you gonna do the director's cut where you voice over the whole
I
thing?
can do that. Well, I mean, I don't know if we need to watch it if people have already seen it, but if there are people who haven't that would want to ask questions, then we could watch the thing. Watch it.
I say we watch it.
Sit.
We can watch it with commentary.
Yeah, director's commentary on.
Yes, that's what I was fishing for. But so Jeff, is it okay if I bootleg your video?
Make it nice and
There's
shaky.
gonna be copies on YouTube there somewhere.
It's only really good if you stop and go to the bathroom about halfway through.
Right. I was actually going to mention something before we went into yours. I was thinking about when you were talking about like the regular everyday things that you do in the future that they skip over in the movies. I was thinking about the bathroom.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
it's so human.
Right.
It's like made for a specific. You know, maybe you go to different countries, it's different. But can you imagine like a Chewbacca and then the crazy guys in the Star Wars fans, and if they all went to the restroom, it's probably like would need to have a different
You would think so.
thing. You know,
You'd have to come up with new icons.
that's why they
for the
skip
front
that
door.
stuff. Yeah,
Right.
the skirt thing doesn't work.
Right.
The little man. So feel free to push the button, Jeff.
Which side do you want me on? If I'm
There, that side. Yeah, that's.
Here's my take on the Toho logo.
The Toho logo.
No, the running commentary is strange.
Finish your
Feels
breakfast,
strange. Feels
boys.
weird. It
Then
seems
you
like we should
need your
watch
strength
it.
for the marathon next week. Ah,
Did you
that's
count
the
the
what
total
you
number of
got.
puns?
Jolly Garlic and I are starting a gazpacho club. Well, keep it cool.
Stay away from that toxic super crunch site.
Okay, Pop. Talk to you later.
Attaboy, son.
He's not yours.
Hey, is that dishwasher running today?
I sure hope so.
Ooh, look at the time. I gotta get to the lab.
This mockchair is chilly. Is that chili I smell? I thought you let a clove loose. That wasn't me. Shh. Hey, where is that thing? Shh. It'll hear us. I think I juiced myself. Let's go. Crappers. It smells like sauerkraut. I dare you to eat. Don't ferment yourself.
Ah, this feels great. Greener's so good for the tap.
Oh, come on, Monty. Take off your top and come in for a hit. No thanks. Fondue gives me the cheese whiz.
Scary fondue.
Mom, Dad, I saw a monster. Huh? You haven't? Oh, hi, Mr. Butternuts. Did you fix our dishwasher? And how? Pop must be in the lab then. Peace out, sauerkraut.
Very white. Oh yeah. It's all about the like how effortlessly you go from a Godzilla movie to slasher. So fun. Mr. Butternuts.
Horrible. Eye smash. Skin's baked. I'll never ride a coach again. In first class. I only got broiled.
I had to actually mop up a lot of the spaghetti sauce because it was too gory originally.
Yeah, what's the rating? Huh? I had a small child come in and I told him it was PG.
Dr. Pepper, visitor.
Hi. Hold on. Hey, I just saw it.
I almost had the sequence carbonated, but I lost count.
But Pop, I saw a giant
A monkey? Keep him away, he'll eat our test bananas.
No, Pop, a giant cabbage.
Don't try to boil one over on me, you
Dad, there he is.
We know this cabbage comes from another menu, and it survived immersion in a toxic marinade. We need to continue studying.
Stage that they're on is the Judas
This
Priest
creature is
box
a threat to
set.
kitchen security. If we don't cut the first slice, we'll be shredded.
Coleslaw! Coleslaw!
Don't act so hastily. We still don't know if it's hostile.
There's always one scientist like that. We'll find out when it's hostile.
Scene where I almost blew up my garage.
Okay, first take blue painter tape.
Dr. Bell, we've got to stop this thing. But imagine what we can learn from it. New preservatives, enhanced pickling technology, vegetable growth hormone. I can see it. Feel like a monster with new brand come. The stakes were too high. This Whopper's flame roiling our best men out there. We've got to pull in before it roasts us all. This is such a rare opportunity. We could tenderize it, extract the juices. Yeah, maybe we throw you in a vat with it and make kimchi. For all we know, it's headed here right now. No, we've got to preserve the factory. Don't let this borscht belt reject feed you one-liner. This thing is going for the balls, Melon. But how can we stop it?
Sorry, Mr. Brandon.
Eureka, my boy. That's it.
I love that.
It was totally like the Johnny Sacco and his flying robot.
I love that. Chop puree did nice.
Little Lionel train controller.
Sumo wrestling.
There's the Charles Atlas ad.
98 pound weekly.
Yep.
Don't let the bully kick sand in your face.
Look really carefully in the robot, sometimes you'll see reflections of the camera.
That rubber candy.
Yes, indeed. That's the other scene where I almost blew up my garage.
Always got that secret power somehow. Turtles.
Cabbages have that some strange power.
Figured out how you did this. Sparkle. I didn't see this coming ahead of time. That was all underdog.
It's all about the, like we're projecting.
This is where you cover the children's eyes.
The Jerry Bruckheimer bit.
That man's a genius.
This is where he really knows how good music is.
I guess they were right about the coleslaw.
Yeah, Brendan Wood, who may be showing up at some point.
Suffering side orders. Mr. Branco will have to start mayonnaise production right away.
Wave of sauerkraut over Hamhog causing unusual weather, a heat wave in Frigidaria, and it's raining deviled eggs right here in Matsueville. Our advice, remain calm and buy condiments.
Butter my gods, I'm sick of all this overcooked news.
Check out the furniture.
Yeah, I'd like to squeeze her.
I'd like the cobbler.
Shh, pass the malt vinegar.
It's Melba Peach, I'd like to cobble her. There's some very fun
She grew a new
things.
sprout or something?
Right.
After 6 or
Sprout
8
another
times.
leaf, yeah, right.
Alright.
Yeah, there's definitely some varied puns. I think Kate McQuaid said overly pun laden, which is
How could it be overly
you're
pun
right.
laden?
I know I can stick a few more in there.
There you have it. I don't know if you want, I don't know. I mean, I could give a spiel, or I could just kind of open it up to questions.
If you're not going to practice your spiel now,
Huh?
when would you?
Doggone it. Yeah. Oh, jinkers. So this is the third in my series of Vegetronics parody, satire genre films. Right. So the first was Kung Fu Kitchen. Some of you have seen it, and is Spaghetti Occidentale or Spaghetti Western. And both of those were much more. And I've been. I get the same questions that I'm sure Scott gets, like, why astronauts? Why vegetables, right? Or sooner or later you're going to get, why silicon? Why silicon? Why astronauts? Right? Why astronaut vegetables? It was interesting because when I first started doing vegetable-based or food-based art, it was really it was also sort of about like the mundane, sort of mundane household items, and so I was doing these like kind of strange transformative things with household objects, food being one subset of that. So I would do these visual puns, or I would do these little verbal jokes or whatever, but using household objects or food or appliances or whatever, and after a while, and it was primarily in photos, not in video. And after a while, the photos with vegetables started to really take on this strange human quality. Like the vegetables had personality, and then they started almost being, stand-ins. Like somebody made the point, like, well, these almost seem like self-portraits. I never thought self-portrait as vegetable. I never really saw it that way. But so then I thought, okay, well, what if that's ridiculous. Well, okay, I'm going to do a movie, and I was watching all these kung fu movies. So at the time, I did Kung Fu Kitchen, which is a martial arts film. It's totally set in my kitchen. I mean, didn't build sets at all. I mean, I think I had like a bamboo skewer as a prop, and the strings were totally visible.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it was completely cheesy and great, and fun,
and still suspenseful.
There you go. A dramatic structure. That's the magic of video.
Yes,
that's
It's a classic.
Fun with subtitles. But where I wanted to go with this is I wanted to like go with the same kind of like completely absurd sort of retarded idea of a genre movie with starring vegetables and using vegetables as cast. But I had done that a couple times before. I knew it worked, so I really wanted to push like the production value. So this was all about production value. I mean, we're just like which in a way is like a totally crazy thing to say, but obviously not necessarily watching it. But basically, I wanted to like take that crazy little idea and take it to its like most logical extreme of like, okay, what if there was like this kind of high budget Hollywood But maybe not. But maybe there's that nostalgia of not necessarily the Hollywood of 2006, but what if the Hollywood of 1965 or the Tokyo production studios of 1965, and where would they have taken this idea? Because that's really where the inspiration comes from. So clearly the Godzilla movies and the Ultraman TV shows, and
where you know it's a rubber suit, but you never lose the power of the kind of the plot and the
right.
I mean, because when you see the things flying across the kitchen with strings, in this one I think it's only the jet planes.
That's the only. I think that's really the only shot that's left.
And yet you still like cheer for them. You're upset when they fall on the ground, roll over, and
exactly.
It's like maybe it won't blow up. Yes, it's gonna blow up.
And people are actually sad when the cabbage gets it. Oh yeah. But in a way, like it's
misunderstood.
Well, that's what the scientists keep saying. That's what Dr. Val Pepper keeps saying. We don't really know if he's hostile. Maybe he's just clumsy. Sorry about the baguettes. You guys okay then?
I can see a whole series of sequels like, the cabbage versus, like
where just the eye of the red pepper eye grows a new cabbage and it comes back for more. Really mad.
The cabbage versus the Ginsu tube. Cut through a tin can.
Still sliced tomatoes.
Right.
There's Godzilla versus Mothra and Godzilla versus whatever.
Absolutely.
This lends itself to that whole.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely does. It's open. It's a sequel. It's open.
So talk about the production value. This is shot in HD.
It is. Yep. Yeah. So it's shot with with a really nice camera, that the Panasonic Baricam, which I used for like some client shoots. So I basically shot this over the period of about 6 months or so, 4 to 6 months, and I would shoot. So I would shoot, and then over a weekend, and then 2 months later we would rent the camera again for a client shoot, and then I would use it for the weekend to scramble to do. So I'd scramble to build all these sets. So like in the week before I knew the camera was coming, I'd be like putting all these putting all these little cracker buildings together. And the landscapes are all kind of a mixture. You can even see in this shot there's a mixture of like actual HO scale buildings, and actually even on the diorama. And I don't know, these are sugar wafers and saltines and Cheez-Its. Right, big factory as well. So, interesting medium to work in. I mean, just in terms of literally like cutting. Somebody asked earlier today about cutting the cutting the windows. Was it tough to cut the windows? And I had to like as with any new medium, we had to really kind of work to figure out the techniques for doing it without just cracking it.
And it's going to take you places now that you know how, because there's a huge call for windows.
Time well spent. I'll say. So shot HD, and then the other big thing was, I didn't do a lot more in terms of lighting. I paid more attention to lighting and exposure and that sort of thing, but the sets were the other really big thing. And Ellen Wetmore, my wife, helped me with set design, so she was really. I call her my production designer, and she really, I would go in and I would make a bunch of stuff and I would kind of lay it out, and then she would go in and tweak it and do some set dressing and that sort of thing. And the other thing that you wouldn't necessarily know looking at it, but it ended up being an insane amount of work, are the skies. And I used this light blue canvas backdrop that I'd painted to be sort of a sky gradient, like a nice, summer, mid-afternoon kind of sky from a deep blue down. With the HD camera, it looked bad. It looked really super flat, and it looked kind of ugly, and it didn't really work. So I actually went through and I did wire removal on a lot of the things. So really the one shot with the planes was the only shot left where I didn't do wire removal on. But a lot of the shots of the characters, I actually used, string or monofilament, and then went through frame by frame and pulled that out. And the same with the skies. But the way that I did it, I experimented quite a bit. And the way that worked the best for me is keeping the texture of the backdrop cloth, but also having a sky layered into it. So, for example, you can see the shadow on the sky, right?
I know I wasn't supposed to admit that, but I love that.
Yeah, but that's the thing. So I wanted to keep that because I could have pulled that out, but it did. There's a certain cheese factor that having that. So it looks like rear. So it looks like rear projection, but then it has a depth to it because the sky. If you go through and look at the skies, they're pretty meticulously crafted in post-production. So they're actual sky. There are actual skies shot with a digital still camera that are placed in, and then I even, like, if the video camera pans, then I have to pan that sky image across along with it, so that it kind of still looks real in that totally fabricated, Toho Studios, miniature set kind of way. So it was kind of insane the amount of time that went into
What kind of time would you say if you had to add it all up?
Oh my god, I have no idea.
Are you not allowed
a
to?
whole
Right?
summer out of my life, God. But I shot it the summer of 2004, and I started it in summer of 2004 and through like January of the next year, and I think I had a rough cut by, I don't know, maybe by Christmas of 2004, and then I probably took the next year, like better part of that summer of last summer, 2005, like working pretty solidly in post-production for it. So like ridiculous.
At what point do you have the actors doing the voiceover? Or, I mean, I'm assuming that the fruit and vegetables don't actually talk.
They did. It took me a lot of time to. Actually, and that stuff happened. That happened that summer as well, last summer as well. So that was actually after everything was shot. I had kind of a scratch track in with myself doing the voices, which was cute. But
that's the version that I have. Actually, I have.
You do still have that version? No way.
On DVD with
nice.
All of the high quality renders are like X'd out, so they're like really pixelated, and it's all Jeff's voice, and it's hysterical. It's a totally different film when it's just him. And I think
which one's funnier?
Hard
to tell because you know me.
About a minute longer.
Yeah.
Because the original
the final scene is better here, I think.
But there's something really bizarre about all of them in your voice.
Right. And does that actually have the real soundtrack, or does that have like the old Ultraman music?
Yeah, it's the old Ultraman music.
So the soundtrack, that's the other thing that's like well crafted. Brendan Wood, the guitarist from Devil Music Ensemble, did the soundtrack. I don't know if you guys know them, but they're based like 2 blocks away from here. They do soundtracks to silent films that play live. They're one of like 5 groups in Boston that do that. So the Gallo Orchestra does that. There's a couple other groups that do that. But they'll play live with a silent film playing. They perform. And they're great, and they do like such a kind of wide range of stuff. They're also doing Brendan's also doing the audio for Art Showdown, which is which at least let's see,
be our first
3
plug.
3 people in this room, including me, are artists or curators in Art Showdown, and we have 1 contestant. So, but it's an art-themed game show that's happening at Art Interactive that some people know about. But go to artshowdown.tv.
Which is
Coming
weirdly enough,
impending.
of all the artists involved in it, I think Jeff is probably like the result is going to be closest to what Jeff does. There are like 30 artists involved in this thing, and the closest is probably going to be to what Jeff does.
Yeah, it's your show,
right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Bizarre pop culture reference, anarchy,
paintball guns,
and comedy.
Well, I noticed
at
some point, when I looked at the movie poster and the stills, the quality of the stills are kind of amazing because I've always had just had to settle for a weird, save as a still from a regular video. Usually it looks like it and it can only be this big.
Yeah.
But I was noticing like the cabbage, like the font is actually filled with cabbage leaf texture.
Yes,
and that's when I was like, give me a break. I thought about this too long. Because I was like, what is that? It's like and then I went, it's a cabbage.
So how do you see this connected to your earlier films, like the Kung Fu Kitchen and the Western films? Is this like an evolution of that? Is it really related, or?
I definitely see it as an evolution of that, but it's like it is kind of a quantum leap in terms. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess you'd see it as a leap if you see this as a progression. But it's funny because people see this and they'll go, yeah, but what I really liked about Kung Fu Kitchen is that you could see the strings. I really like that cheesiness.
And after hours, you're like,
oh man, yeah, right. Oh, why did I spend all this time? You know, or I really like that you could see that it was in your kitchen. So I mean, I definitely was trying something new in terms of this, and I think what I was trying is to really build a new fantastic world in a way that I didn't do with the other stuff, right? I mean, I was really kind of like transplanting those genre films into my own mundane, you know, dorky everyday environment. Like, it's my kitchen and my floor's linoleum and cheesy and whatever, and it works. But here I was really trying to transform. And in that sense, I guess it's much closer to the genre that I'm parodying than my previous stuff. But I definitely see it as a continuation of those previous pieces. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen like your earlier work with just the photos and seeing the early movies, and I think it's great seeing this evolution. It's like I always wonder, like, what would you have done like 10 years ago if you had HD technology to shoot Kung Fu Kitchen?
I wonder, like, would I have done that, or probably not, because I think there was better. I could have paid a lot more attention to meticulous production values at that point, but I think I was really doing more of a run and gun, crazy kind of one man. That's the other big difference. Now that if I really want to lock down, I guess, the whole production value shift is that those were always one man band, and I always saw this kind of production of them as a one man band. It was literally me in the kitchen with and I would rig up these like insane little things. So I'd have like a stick with like 3 onions with a little crossbeam on one side, and I'd have something else over here, and then I want the camera to be moving, so maybe I'd have the camera here, and I'd skateboard. Yeah, exactly. So it was literally me, maybe my foot's tweaking something over here. So it was totally like one man band, and that with all of the if you
even eating the stuff afterwards.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But if you think of the one-man band, I mean, there's this kind of like self-absorbed. I mean, it's almost like the astronaut, like this self-contained environment. It's like, and is that because they just don't get along with other people? So like no, you can't play guitar with what I'm doing. I have like a complete vision, but there's something that's so kind of rinky-dinked together about it, and I liked that aspect. But here I actually relied on a lot of other people to help me, right? So generally when I shot, there would be other people there helping to manipulate the stuff. Got somebody else to do soundtrack for me. Got somebody else to do production design. So really, I owe this to a lot of other people helping me as well. It's not just the Jeffu's one-person show thing here. So that's actually that's a big difference in a way.
This may kind of sound like a silly question, but how does that make you feel, like going from like doing it all yourself to having a whole crew of people? Do you feel like it's completely your film now? I mean, like, did you really have a say in the soundtrack, or are you?
Oh, I have a lot to say. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I think that once you do something that involves a lot of other people, you do give up creative control. But at the same, I mean, that's one way to see it, right? If you're thinking about, your own solo work as being the quintessential artwork, then yeah, I guess you could see it as giving up control. But at the same time, it becomes more collaborative.
You get a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have asked for. Like, I imagine the soundtrack would be a
and that's the great thing. Yeah, exactly. So I gave Brendan a lot of direction in terms of the soundtrack. I said, well, these are the types of pieces that I was thinking of. I gave him my rough cut with the old scratch track on, and I said, well, these are the kind of emotional things that I'm trying to hit with these different scenes. This is what I'm thinking, scene by. I gave him a scene by scene breakdown. This is what I'm thinking for each of these. And then he just took it and rolled with it.
Here's a Regan eye, red pepper.
Yep.
Well, collaboration is amazing. I mean, as you know, I work with Collaborator exclusively, so all of my creative work is still shared. Mm-hmm. And we always talk about the fact that 2 people end up producing the work of 6. Because one person can only do so much. One person's ideas and vision and motivation and drive and limitations only get you so far. But just adding 2 people together, you can get something far beyond anything either one of them were
exactly. It's not even just 2 people doing the work of 6, but it's 2 people doing. There's like almost a third virtual person that's there. I mean, with Harvey Loves Harvey, you guys even talk about that explicitly. But so if you have 2 people collaborating, there's like a third virtual person who's there. Because there's a new identity gets formed.
Yeah. Well, everybody wants to impress everybody else, so everybody works harder. You're trying to
maybe your collaborations, but No, but yeah, absolutely. And well, but then you get ideas in conversation that you can never have just sitting alone in your studio going, I got this weird little idea.
And you don't have that one excuse, well, that's just the way I thought it should be. You actually have to defend that out loud to the other person.
Right.
At the early enough level where you can change it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the director, so
It's
obviously I
supposed to be like
had
that.
veto power for stuff, you know, unlike a true collaboration. But at the same time, there's a lot of unexpected stuff that happened, you know, and in a lot of scenes where people were there with me, there were things that happened in the scene that wouldn't have happened if I were the one who put them together. Or the fact that Ellen came in and tweaked set and built some sets entirely and tweaked some sets that I had already put together. Like she would come in and no, you really should put this here. Oh, and we should do a little cutout window here. Blah blah blah. You know, so like, all right, so this cutout window in the back. Well, that makes some other interesting things happen. You know, or if you're there, you know, like for example in the boardroom scene, which is one of my favorite scenes visually. Boardroom. And you know, so Ellen did like the general set, and then we were there shooting it, and oh, we need something back here because it was just sort of this translucent background that looked nice, and we put a light through it, and so so I had these. I had been doing this. Actually, it's not. It's a mill building in Fitchburg that, as it turned out. Like the day after we shot, that building was torn down. So it was the last appearance. It's like right on North Street, like right next to the rec center. By JR's Pub. It's a parking lot now, exactly. And so that was like really fortuitous. But I had been because I was doing all these little buildings. I just took my camera around with me, and like if I would go to a city, like I went to a conference in Toledo of all places, so I had my camera out, and you know, why are you stopping to take a picture of that ugly industrial building? Because I might want to make it, you know. So I was like looking at model railroad kits and all these kinds of things to build buildings. But so a lot of the building design, even though they look like they're just kind of little square boxes, but I was actually looking at a lot of this stuff, and so okay, well I have a photo of that building, let's print it out and put it back, and that was actually. It's funny because it looks, you know, this was actually just a black and white laser print of that image, like kind of stuck behind there, and then it kind of works because it's lit, and you've got other colors sort of bouncing off of the other stuff in there. And what you can't see here, but if you watch the film, there's on this wall here. We were like, when we were shooting this direction, you know, somebody was like, well, we need something on that wall. Okay, I had two
portrait of
friends of mine. Yeah, so I had
That's
two
so
friends of mine
nice.
there, and we're like,
Board of
what should it be?
directors.
So one of them suggested, there's got to be the board of, you know, the
saw
CEO or the board of directors. Okay, so we just took, you know, digital camera, we took an image of him, printed it out in like a sepia tone, and put it in happened to have a frame the right size.
It's like blue toned, right?
Right, it was like blue tone, that's right. And then my wife Ellen is a metalsmith, so she has like little pieces of brass and metal and junk in her studio. Yeah, so I just got a little brass thing, hacksaw.
Total museum of fine art, too.
But literally, we were like totally in the middle of the shoot, and somebody was like, "You really need this thing on the wall here." But if I was alone shooting, I would have been like, fuck it, I'll just shoot it. But having a couple other people there kind of helped to push that value, and so you get a lot of ideas that come up. That I mean, they may be weird little subtle things that if you were watching it, you may not have noticed. You watching it like 8 times at the gallery, you start to see.
There's a lot to see. I mean, that's one of the things.
It's dense. It's a lot denser than my other stuff. I mean, I guess if you watch Kung Fu Kitchen 8 times, you go, man, that guy never sweeps his floor. But, but you don't see like the meticulous, or not meticulous is wrong, but you don't see the level of detail in the sets, I guess. That you do here. But if anybody wants to know my secrets for making the good prints, I mean the HD camera is HD, but it's not like super high def. It's like 1280 by 720. So
Those look like film.
no, it's unreal. I had no idea that they would
Use fractals.
I didn't use fractals actually, but I did up-res in Photoshop first, and then I did the Matt Nash trick, which is to duplicate your layer, and you do it's not a find edges, it's a high pass filter, and then you set that upper level to overlay, and then drop the opacity a little bit, and we'll show you a tutorial.
Can you talk a little bit more
Run
about
through
this
that again.
presentation? Because I first saw this show at the Brattle when we had that film screening, and then I showed it at the screening I did, and then I've seen it a couple times in different versions of this.
Yeah.
And how
Was this at the Brattle?
So
It was at the Boston Cinema Census.
Yeah, was it the?
Yeah, which Jeff.
That's what it meant, right?
Yeah, and it was my premiere, my public premiere in January.
So how do you what do you see this as being a film that's screened in a theater, or do you see it being more like an installation like this, or what are your?
I see it
interpretations?
more as a film being screened in a theater. Well, let's say that I initially conceived of it as a film. You know, what I mean? I didn't start out going, I'm going to make this movie that's going to be presented in a diorama or video installation like this, depending on what. I still call it a diorama. Major again. But to be presented in a diorama setting, I didn't initially conceive of that, but so yeah, in a way, like everything else here is really in support of the movie, which I mean, whatever works. I mean, and I'll be honest, I initially felt a little weird about it because it was like, well, it's really about the movie. It's not, but then again, it seems to work.
Yeah, I was curious about that.
Of course, please bail me out.
Well, it's not bailing you out at all. It's actually
rile me up.
This show started because I wanted to show this piece.
That's true. This whole show started.
This whole show started because I was drunk and we were sitting over there, and James was like, "We haven't got nothing scheduled for August, so you should do it." And I said, "Okay." And then I went home and went, "Holy shit! I actually have to find artists to put together." No, but
so were you actually laying on the floor when you, like your artist statement says that?
Kind of. Well, it was
only because I couldn't stand up.
It was a Thursday night. I came home. And Friday, I work all day. So Saturday, I actually was, laying on my couch watching Saturday afternoon B-movie, science fiction. And it was something from the 70s, something really terrible, like Empire of the Ants or something like that. and I just remember thinking, and I was laying there just like, wow, this inspired me, because I watched Empire of the Ants when I was 15 or something. I loved that just bad sci-fi genre, and I was laying there and I just thought, I bet there are artists who grew up and took this and used this, and instantly I said, well, of course Jeff does. I mean, that's right. It's almost irrelevant to talk about Empire of the Ants. I'm like, okay, Jeff, that's what Jeff does.
And I had given you a copy of.
Yeah, I have a DVD with this, with an early cut of this, and Kung Fu Kitchen and stuff, and so I was like, I wonder if I could build a show around that. I wonder what would happen if Day of the Cabbage is... No one in the right mind is ever going to put Day of the Cabbage as the centerpiece of a gallery exhibition. So let's start there.
Right.
And I had seen the diorama version of this out in Fitchburg, so I knew that it traveled well. And it was a very short leap, actually, from Day of the Cabbage to Scott.
Yeah, definitely.
And that kind of came together.
Day of the Astronaut.
And I called Paul and I called Scott. Do you want to do the show? Can we get to work? And there was some hassle about getting a couple of pieces, but it was pretty straightforward.
No, you have to put the Chewbacca
You had to get
Chewbacca
was a fight. Chewbacca and
I'm glad you fought for it. That's my
fight.
favorite.
But then I ran up against. Well, I actually ran up against sort of two walls simultaneously. Which thankfully led me to Leah, but the two walls I ran up against, first of all, were we have two guys who are funny, and I wanted something that was a little less. And the other wall I ran up against was that I can come up with 90 guys who are doing sci-fi, humor, stuff. I had a lot of trouble thinking of a woman who was doing sci-fi stuff. I just couldn't actually come up with anybody who would really fit in well with the other two people. And all I'd ever seen of Leah's stuff was the card from your show. Embarrassingly enough, I didn't actually go see the show. But you had Cordula had sent me pictures.
Card. That's a good card.
One of the big ones too.
Well, Cordula had sent me all the pictures and stuff. I'd seen a lot more than just the card. Cordula had pictures of the show, and it just kind of came together that it was like. I didn't want it to be an all dude show because that seemed really
Sausage fest. And it was
Sausage
fast
fest.
too. I mean, I remember talking to you.
Oh yeah, the turnaround was
I
about a
remember
week.
he was like, I was with them that night before he came here.
Yeah.
I blame
And
you
then,
for that.
Like 2 days later, like, I have a show together. It's like, how did you do it that fast?
Well, it was pretty interesting actually
pretty
because
fast.
I had a message from Matt saying, "Hey Jeff, this is Matt. Give me a call. I have this weird idea." Click. So I called him and he was like,
Well, you had told me July instead of
Right.
August, so it was even quicker turnaround.
"Yeah, it was going to be quick." But yeah, Matt was like, "I have this idea. There might be this show at Green Street." And then we got talking, and then like 2 minutes later, as we were talking, he was like, "So let's say it's definite."
That was pretty much how it happened. Yeah.
When do you plan on it?
But I mean, Boston, when you look at Boston the way that I do, Boston has certain themes going on. My weird view. But I love the stuff that's happening. The themes are all like really serious and really like arty, and I love the stuff that's not. I love the stuff that's. I mean, I loved this show. The work that you were showing, and I loved when it was at Loco Rotoro because you went to the South End, and you saw these paintings, and you just went, who in their right mind's going to show that? But that was awesome. Like God, it was the first show at this new gallery, and it was just like, wow, I like them a lot. They're doing really good stuff. So to just try to put together, what I actually thought was interesting, fun, and funny, and cool, and get it all. Try to find this little theme that tied together a couple of those interesting things.
And you also tied in that whole summer kind of
fun
thing.
Summer blockbuster.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
or just summer chilling in the back porch reading, sci-fi pulp novels. Right. Coleslaw, that's a good, summer.
I know it's very picnic oriented. There was no baked. Well, I guess that one potato had a rough time in the train wreck. But
First class.
The world's easiest summer garden.
Yeah.
Broiled. I have to mow that lawn. I don't know.
Well, I was going to ask you about, I think you pretty much covered it. I was just going to say, what does it feel like to do all that work for 2 years and end up with a shiny circular thing?
Yeah, well.
Here it is. Granted, it can be projected, you can fill the room with the sound and you can have a giant image. And it's really easy to travel.
It's a very different context, and I like it in both contexts, actually. Because this is I like also the in a way, the setting here was kind of collaborative. I was setting, I'd done a little model, and I envisioned, okay, this is going to go here, kind of in the middle, and we'll do these supporting pieces along here. And as I was setting stuff up, James comes in with a couple chairs. I never even thought of it as literally like a little mini theater. So there's like a definite collaborative element that works, I think, really, really well, because it makes this kind of small, intimate setting. You're close enough that it's like you're maybe in my living room watching on my TV or something, I guess. But my TV happens to be out of a month. But in a way, yeah. The diorama is it's based on not a specific scene from the movie, but it's kind of I guess we have the robot and the tanks. So.
Which I continuously told people that you used a real.
Yeah,
cabbage.
I don't want to mislead.
This is just for.
Because we don't want a rotting cabbage.
You didn't want to have the fruit fly break out.
I don't know if that is misleading. Yeah, this one's a fake one. I know it's.
Where do you get your firecrackers?
Pretty good.
A friend of mine.
Careful.
The friend of mine who was the friend. It's all right. Live free or die. The friend of mine the friend who was coming down to help me that day. That balmy Saturday, just after it was mid-July, the summer 2004, and I said, "Wait, you live in Nashua? You stop by a fireworks shop on the way down?"
They only sell this for agricultural purposes.
Oh, perfect. I was going to plant the cabbage seeds afterwards. But he showed up with this giant, he said, well, they had like a 3-for-1 sale because it was after the 4th of July. So I just got a bunch of stuff. I got these exploding tanks, and we got Roman candles and this and that. And so we experimented with various things. Did no serious casualties.
So fun.
Yeah. Well, then that was, that's the thing. I've always been about as much real effects as possible. So there are only 2, I think it was, maybe James had asked me, really. Like the only two, besides the whole removal of the wires and placing the skies in, the only two obvious digital effects, or three I guess, are the cabbage crash landing, the
There it is
laser,
now.
The laser, and the Jerry Bruckheimer, the cabbage like flying into the camera.
Why
I
is
just
that
couldn't
Jerry
resist.
Bruckheimer?
Oh, it's not. I don't know. I just think of like the
Because it's so
big
loose.
Hollywood explosion, the big, big contemporary Hollywood explosions. But I think I didn't literally get the idea and say, hey, I'm going to do the Jerry Bruckheimer explosion. I was like, as I was, working out the explosion, it was like, it'd be great to have a chunk fly in. And then I did it. I was like, oh man, that's so like Hollywood. It's more Hollywood
Right.
cheese than it is, 50s schlock cheese ball. But I still have to do it.
Nice. Well, any other questions for you guys?
I just wanted to say that I saw this at Jim's show at Studio Soto. It was just a video, and I liked it so much better in the little box.
Oh,
The
thanks.
stuff around it.
Yeah, for me, as somebody who was helping, set up, that he'd already figured out. Well, there's more than the box. There's the button. There's the fact that it's got a script that makes the menu disappear. One time I came in and it was just off for some reason, and I restarted it and it was ready to go. I mean, anybody who's worked with technology, it's like you end up with, how do we hide the computer? And this was like, it was a computer hiding box, and it had, you had thought through a lot of other things, like the sound that sits there and loops through is actually pleasant,
Thanks a lot.
So yeah, but I mean that was one of the things that I thought was really great. Is it says this is 10 minutes long, which I think people want to know that. And I think if
Am I going to sit here for 45 minutes?
yeah,
Or is it 30 seconds?
and push the green button, and it changes when you push the button, so you know you did something right. So there were some really good things that are definitely because of your experience, like
Thanks a lot.
getting somebody to push a button
The
in a
interactive
gallery.
stuff, even though it's a fairly simple interactivity, that's what I do. So, but it's interesting, actually, the first time, my previous incarnation of this, the whole setup was primarily the same, except the box itself was newer. But it said press green button to play, and it actually had like a green circle on the screen. Yeah. But I figured, green circle, they'll see the bright, shiny green, circular button. But too literal. So.
Well, now you've got
that
the
from
touch. You
experience.
mix your touch screens with your regular screens in the real world. Yeah.
But there isn't a button. So I definitely had to re-engineer it for that. But.
You need hackcontrols.com and everything you need.
Right. Do they have a cabbage-shaped button?
Does it feel like cabbage?
You should have put the button in the middle of the cabbage.
Press button.
Did anybody knock anything over?
Not yet.
Is this child safe? You're about to have a baby. Is it?
Huh?
You can't take this home with some child.
It's true. Yeah,
Pretty tall.
my next project is collaborative, where Ellen and I are making an actual human baby.
But you already started that, right?
I am sure that it will. There will be much destruction. I'll have to script it. John Travolta.
Well, thank you very much, all you guys. And if you have any other questions, just follow up with the artist. That was great.